Decius Brutus is actually Decimus Brutus. Ahenobarbus in Antony and Cleopatra is Ahenobarbus. Again, you can see the euphony in the changes of every one of these names. But of course, the Shakespearean names have often become more familiar than the originals. The only two women in the play are Calpurnia and Portia. As in Coriolanus, Shakespeare filled them out, although not as much as the women in Coriolanus. But still, he gives them a little bit more than exists in the sources. And it's perfectly obvious that both of these women tried to dissuade their men from carrying through what they actually carried through with. Portia, who, remember, comes from a famous old family herself, the family of the Catos, tried to tell Brutus, don't get involved in this. And it seems like everybody in town knew about the conspiracy against Caesar except Caesar himself. And so all the warnings that we have, including that of Calpurnia, are actually in the sources. But Shakespeare gives them more than we have in the sources, even though it didn't work. But both of them show the power of Roman women, which in a sense goes all the way back to the Sabines and Volumnia and Virgilia and so forth. Roman women were, to use a not very good word, the most liberated of the ancient Greco-Roman world. They couldn't vote, but they had immense power through the men in their lives. And we see this especially in the women in Shakespeare's plays. As I said, he's good with powerful women anyway. But Calpurnia and Portia both exercise a great deal of power. And that again becomes one of the high points of the play, even though there is authority for it in the sources. As a final point, not really relevant to Shakespeare, but on the topic of women in antiquity, there's a good object lesson in the matter of Calpurnia. Portia, of course, commits suicide when she learns her husband is dead, so that's the end of her. But Calpurnia, we know that she probably was still in her 30s, because we know about some of the male members of her family, including her brother, who served the new Roman Empire for the next 50 years. So she probably was only in her 30s. She and Caesar were childless, which of course didn't help with the matter of Cleopatra and Caesarion any. Yet, with the death of Caesar, Calpurnia drops out of the record entirely. The last we see of Calpurnia is on the night of the Ides of March, when she's giving Caesar's papers to Antony, as she should do. And then this woman, unless she dropped dead very quickly, which would probably be recorded, could have lived another half century or so, but there is no mention of her anywhere in the sources. And such is the fate of women in antiquity when they're not connected to men. The problem that we all have in working on the topic of women in antiquity, as I have, is that we see them through the men in their lives. And that's, of course, even true with Cleopatra. And that's a difficulty that we have in understanding what these women are really like. So to quote Calpurnia, I will not stand on ceremony, but end it there and open things up for any questions. I'm fine, thank you. Questions? Yeah.
Well, it's not really a question. I guess I don't mind having the play be named for Julius Caesar because his shadow is made so extraordinary by the reactions of the people around him, and that's thanks to the playwright. But I love that you've put this into my brain to think about. It's fabulous. So
Yeah.
I don't know maybe my question would be, what do you do at night? You must think great thoughts. You must think great thoughts, because I just love hearing you talk.
Well, thank you so much. Well, this is my life, and I love talking. It sounds rather egocentric, but I love sharing this kind of stuff with people, and I think of it as telling a story.
Yeah.
Not dry academic facts, but these were real people just like us who had problems and heroic moments, and let's try and learn what they're like. Yeah.
All right. Fascinating. Thank you. I had read something about the relationship between Brutus and Caesar. Potential family, Brutus potentially son of or something. Do you have any comment on that, or have I just been reading?
Well, the one comment that we have about what Caesar said at his death comes not from Plutarch, but from the biographer Suetonius, which Shakespeare probably did not have access to. And he says that Caesar at the moment of death said in Greek, "Kai su teknon," which means, "and you, my child." Now, do we take this literally, or is it simply just, the way an older person would address a younger person? We just really don't know. This was a tightly knit ruling elite, and everybody knew everybody else. And obviously there would be paternal relationships. And remember, except for the questionable Caesarion, Caesar had no children. So you would expect that he might reach out to younger members of the aristocracy and consider them essentially the children that he never had.
So the line in most unkindness cut, you think that's no familial kind family relationship?
No, and that's not in the sources. It's just good Shakespeare. Yeah.
Wasn't there something about Caesar having an affair with Remus's mother?
Everybody had affairs with everybody. Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. Brutus's mother, Servilia. And again, I mean, who knows? Generally, you don't know unless there's a product from the affair who's exactly connected with whom here. But again, to repeat, it's a tightly knit aristocratic elite, and obviously these people have relationships that we'll never know about. Again, Servilia is another example of a very powerful woman who gets about 10 lines in the sources, but obviously was far more important than what the sources tell us. Yeah.
It just seems that the Romans figured out about how to, regime change was going to do it. You kill somebody. I mean, the assassinations, and when a general got to be too big for his britches over in wherever, they'd bring him home, and if he was lucky, he'd get retired out to the country or something. And then of course in the empire, just continually, somebody decided,
death was cheap at that time, and there was no real system. You send someone out to the provinces, and what do? They raise an army and come back and attack Rome. It doesn't necessarily work.
And of course the families killing off each other.
Yeah.
It's
a different world.
It was
yeah.
I just had read a bunch of Roman history and was really shocked that this whole thing of somebody gets to have too much power, or somebody obviously it's back with Romulus killed Remus. They learned how to do that.
Well, that's old style sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
Kind of another twist on all of this. That's what was so different when Octavian is able to take control and become the Emperor Augustus, because he survives for another 50 years until AD 14 and is able to put it all together for a while at least. And one thing that he did was to bring his opponents into the government where he could watch them, instead of sending them out to a province where they could cause trouble. And it was Augustus's longevity that was a major factor in finally making the change from this endless cycle of assassination, powerful people, and so forth, to a more constant system that worked for quite a while, really.
Yeah.
But no, it's a different world where life is relatively cheap. Remember, it's a world where most of us would be blind or dead or sick, or you ladies would have all died in childbirth by now. It's a world where there are many things that could go wrong with you physically, and so ending it all seemed like a perfectly reasonable alternative.
Wow.
Yeah.
In the play, the conspirators tend to be, Brutus seems to be more passive than I think he really was. As I understand it, he was a student of Cicero's,
Yeah.
and Cicero was teaching him about the principles of a republic and encouraging him very heavily to, in fact, get rid of Julius Caesar because of his pretensions.
Well, the real instigator is Cassius, of course. He's a person who had a very checkered career. 10 years later, he had abandoned his superior officer on the upper Euphrates, and the whole Roman force was wiped out by the Parthians. And so Cassius was a person who really wasn't doing very well, and perhaps saw his chance here for the glory that he never had, and managed to rope in a number of people, including Brutus, who had much more idealistic reasons, as you say, for doing what they did rather than narrow political career reasons. And to bring someone like Brutus in gave the conspirators legitimacy, because you could say we're doing this to save the Republic, not advance the career of Cassius. And so, no, what you say is right. Brutus was a well-educated man. He'd studied with Cicero. He'd spent time in the Eastern world studying with the great Greek scholars of the era. He comes from a very notable background. And yes, he is passive in a way. He's the idealist, not the practical politician, which Cassius more or less is. Yeah.
I had a question about the tribunes that appear in both Coriolanus and Julius Caesar. How, it seems in Coriolanus that they're a very new phenomenon. And I was just wondering sort of the political history of the tribunes, because they play such a pivotal role in Coriolanus and a minor role in Julius Caesar.
Well, the tribunes were one of the magistracies established with the Republic, and it was part of this whole conflict between the plebeians and patricians, because the tribunes were plebeians, and they could block anything that the patricians, which means the Senate basically, did. And so they had immense power, but at the same time, it was power that could easily be misused. And this is one thing that happens when you get down to the 1st century, that tribunician power begins to be misused. The one check on the tribunes is that if you became a tribune, you couldn't stand for higher office. You could never become a consul or anything like that. So you had to really demonstrate your devotion to the people, so to speak. But by the 1st century BC, you're having problems with this. And one thing that Augustus does when he sets up his system after the death of Antony and Cleopatra, this is in 27, is that he takes tribunician power unto himself. And so from that time on, the emperors essentially have the tribunician power, and that eliminates this little problem of tribunician vetoes, which can be misused. They're supposed to be used for important legislation, and they end up being used for trivial little personal things. And that's part of the whole problem in the 1st century BC.
I've got a question. When Coriolanus, the big moment in Coriolanus is when he's told to go to the square and stand to show his wounds to the people.
Yeah.
And is that to be a tribune or is that to be a consul?
Coriolanus is consul, so you really can't be both.
So the consul is like from the higher class and the tribune
Yeah.
from the lower class?
Well, it's complicated. The tribunes are from the same class as the consuls, but they are supposed to be more devoted to the people. And as I said, they can't move up the ladder. That's the end of their career if they're going to be tribunes. So they really have to be somebody who is really interested in the causes they're supposed to
The
represent.
Tribune itself.
Huh?
The Tribune is.
Yeah, the
But
Tribune.
the consul, that moment where he says that he won't do it. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a huge moment in the play where he refuses to like submit himself.
Yeah.
Because he claims that his wounds for Rome, everybody knows.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the thing that, I'm an artist, right? I was working on submissions had to do with St. Thomas and the idea that Christ actually shows his wounds
Yeah.
and wants people to touch them. And there's a name for that process, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know what it is, but it's a formula in a sense. I mean, it's like Antony and the bloody toga,
Yeah.
and saying here's where Brutus got him, here's where Cassius got him.
Because like the wounded body, like the
Yeah.
display of the wounded body for Julius Caesar is a big moment in that play.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the idea that the Coriolanus won't show the wounds
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like another moment in Coriolanus.
Well, Coriolanus was a person obviously with problematic issues toward power, and he may have been one of these people who was better on the battlefield than holding any kind of civil power. Did you have something else?
I was wondering about this change in Rome between the kings and the consuls. And you said that that story of Coriolanus was, in Plutarch, was associated with the Greek who went to Sparta and then
Yeah.
went back to Athens. I wonder if there's any history in the Spartan colonies in the south of Italy who probably were trading up toward Rome, who might have, because they had consuls there,
Well,
that they
there's-
might have influenced
Yeah.
Rome and the
Oh, yeah,
idea
definitely.
of that
The-
governance
Yeah,
structure.
a lot of these early Roman stories are Greek inspired, and the Romans could not have had them until they knew about the Greeks. Romulus and Remus is a story right out of Greek drama of sibling rivalry, for example. And so, again, it's the problem of this back formation, that our evidence is from the 1st century BC, when the Roman and Greek world have been entangled for hundreds of years. And it's a problem to figure out what's genuinely Roman and what the Romans could not have learned about until they came into contact with the Greek cities in South Italy. And we know that, excuse me, the earliest translation of Greek literature into Latin is the Odyssey, and the next earliest translation are Greek dramas. So from a very early date, 4th century or so, the Romans were very well knowledgeable about Greek literature, and they plugged this into their own history. Even the traditional date of the founding of the Republic is suspect, because that happens to be the date of the founding of the Athenian democracy, 510 BC. So there's been some tweaking here, obviously, to make the Romans connect more with the Greeks, which was certainly the case in later times, probably not for the first few hundred years. Okay, has everybody
No,
done with it?
I do have something.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, Libby, what you're saying that Shakespeare really did not have a true translation in English until after his.
So it seems, yeah.
Because if I remember my Libby, Camillus was also expelled.
Yeah, that's
Also
a-
came back, but that was in the 390s. or
Yeah,
380s.
well, that's again another one of
Yeah,
those
it's on
early
the-
stories that's,
So did that trope work? Because Livy seems to work that trope like 3 or 4 times.
yeah, oh, yeah. And again, a lot of it is Greek inspired, and the irony is that these stories have become so well known in art and literature that probably never happened, but it's very difficult to write the history of the first 400 years of Rome. It's so tangled up in the Roman self-conception, Greek influence, a lack of data, But you do get, as you say, Livy's kind of regenerating the same type of story over and over again about these heroic people or not so heroic people of the early history.
I do not remember Plutarch doing Camillus. Now, he may have, I don't remember that.
Well, yes, there is a Plutarch Camillus, but
So,
again, it's the same kind, it's like the Romulus, it's like the Coriolanus. It's based on mythic history.
right, that's where Shakespeare could have gotten.
Yeah,
instead
yeah.
of trying to get through the living.
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
All right, thank you.